All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. We're going to unpack 15 massive global headlines from one absolutely chaotic day, May 11th, 2026. You know, it was one of those days where the news cycle literally just didn't stop. But we aren't going to look at these as isolated incidents. No, we're going to connect the dots to show you exactly how international instability ripples right into our domestic lives. Because honestly, once you lay the whole picture out, the cause and effect is just strikingly clear.
To make sense of all this, we've organized today's incredibly dense news into 4 clear buckets. First, the escalating Middle East conflict. Second, the resulting global economic shockwaves. Third, shifting world alliances. And finally, U.S. domestic maneuvers playing out against this whole backdrop.
So Section 1, the Middle East conflict escalates. We're starting right at the epicenter of current global instability, marked by a dramatic breakdown in peace talks.
The diplomatic situation took a super sharp turn here. Following a really tense weekend filled with drone attacks and maritime skirmishes, President Trump firmly rejected Tehran's latest peace proposal. He straight up called it totally unacceptable and accused Iran of playing games. This essentially puts any chance of a ceasefire on life support, and it signals a stark, immediate potential return to open hostilities.
And the military realities backing up those hostilities? They are immense. 10,000. That's the staggering number of first-person view, or FPV drones, that Iranian military officials just announced they're deploying to their ground forces. But the threat doesn't actually stop at their borders. Intelligence suggests Tehran is actively handing this highly precise, lethal technology over to Hezbollah and Iraqi militias, which obviously expands the conflict zone in a big way.
Now, this next part starkly illustrates the immediate impact these rising tensions have on global infrastructure. We're not just talking about ground skirmishes anymore. We are looking at major trade arteries being completely choked off. Just look at this. A tanker carrying liquefied natural gas from Qatar was actually forced to turn away from the vital Strait of Hormuz after it approached an area Iran claims to control. Pro-regime media effectively boasted that they blocked the vessel's passage.
So how do neighboring countries even react to a blockade like that? Well, industry reports reveal the United Arab Emirates is resorting to using what they call dark tankers to evade Iranian transit regulations in the Persian Gulf. It's a risky game, and it works in 3 steps. First, they literally turn off their automatic ship trackers to evade detection. They basically just go dark. Second, they conduct these incredibly dangerous ship-to-ship oil transfers right out on the open water. And finally, they export that crude to the global market completely under the radar.
Which brings us to Section 2, Global Economic Shockwaves. Let's see how this all builds up, because when major energy choke points get blocked and dark tankers come into play, it triggers an immediate financial fallout. To manage this massive geopolitical fallout, President Trump traveled to Beijing for a really high-stakes summit with President Xi Jinping. But he didn't go alone. He brought along 17 heavyweight tech and finance executives. You know, this isn't your standard diplomacy. This is basically an economic rescue mission aimed at stabilizing a deeply rattled global market.
I mean, we are talking about absolute industry titans here. Elon Musk, Apple's Tim Cook, and Larry Fink of BlackRock. The sheer corporate weight trying to navigate trade and the fallout of the Iran war is pretty much unprecedented. Having these specific executives right there at the negotiating table in Beijing really underscores just how intertwined the tech supply chain, global finance, and Middle Eastern stability actually are.
Meanwhile, back home, everyday Americans are definitely feeling the pinch. The U.S. is currently tackling this war-induced inflation from 2 completely different angles. On the monetary side, the Senate officially confirmed Kevin Warsh to lead the Federal Reserve, stepping in for Jerome Powell right as global markets grapple with this inflation crisis. Then, on the policy side, President Trump is proposing an indefinite suspension of the federal gas tax. It's a direct, really aggressive move to combat those record fuel prices driven by the conflict we just talked about, though it's going to require congressional approval to actually pass.
Now, as the major powers talk economics, the rest of the world certainly isn't standing still. Section 3, Shifting World Alliances. Let's look at how global powers are reacting in the shadows of these crises.
Over in India, BRICS foreign ministers convened ahead of their massive 2026 summit, and they gathered specifically to coordinate their collective stance on the ongoing Iran war and the U.S.-Israel military maneuvers. This really highlights a powerful coalition of non-Western nations working rapidly to align their diplomatic and economic strategies in response to the whole Middle East situation.
Simultaneously, we're seeing some historic ideological pivots happening in Europe and the U.S. Over in Hungary, Péter Magyar was just sworn in as the new prime minister, officially ending Viktor Orbán's 16-year rule. And in a deeply symbolic first act, the EU flag was ordered right back onto the Parliament building. Meanwhile, the U.S. formally rejected a UN progress declaration on migration. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the government is completely rejecting the management of mass arrivals, pivoting strictly to what he termed remigration.
And amidst all this high-level statecraft, we really can't forget the isolated but deadly tragedies running in the background of this exact same day. Hundreds gathered in northwest Pakistan to bury 14 police officers killed in a suicide bombing by a breakaway faction of the Pakistani Taliban. At the same time, in the Canary Islands, hazardous material evacuations continued from a ship as the death toll from a really dangerous Andes hantavirus outbreak officially reached 3. Finally, let's step back home. Section 4, U.S. Domestic Maneuvers. Let's examine how all this intense global pressure serves as the backdrop for what's happening right in our own backyard. Domestically, the political and legal landscape is shifting just as rapidly as the global one. The Supreme Court just handed down a 6-3 partisan vote backing Alabama in a fiercely contested redistricting battle. This ruling officially vacated a federal order that had previously barred the state from using a congressional map accused of eliminating a majority black district. At the very same time, the administration is making some key personnel moves. President Trump solidified his diplomatic team by nominating close political allies Doug Mastriano and Kari Lake as U.S. ambassadors. And over in the courts, Cole Thomas Allen, that's the suspect accused of attempting to assassinate the president at a Washington gala just last month, well, he officially pleaded not guilty to all charges, including assault on a federal officer.
Which really brings us to the ultimate question for you to take away from this explainer. When we step back and look at the whole shebang, we have military escalation and blocked energy transit in the Middle East, high-stakes finance scrambles in Beijing, huge ideological shifts in Europe, and a deeply polarized domestic landscape right here in the US. Like I said at the start, these are absolutely not isolated events. They're all feeding into one another. So how will these deeply interconnected global and domestic pressures reshape the reality we live in for the rest of 2026? It's a massive, complex puzzle, but by breaking it down, the picture of our shifting world order becomes a whole lot clearer. Thanks for joining me to map it all out.